Welcome to There Is No Alternative, a podcast about entrepreneurship where I talk to founders, investors, and executives in the consumer world. I'm Tina Bou-Saba, founder of CXT Investments, where I invest in consumer brands and technology. I've invested in more than 40 companies over the past decade. Along the way, I've been lucky to meet incredibly talented and resilient leaders who have built great businesses and well-known brands. Entrepreneurship can be deeply rewarding and also extremely challenging. Why do some people choose this path? How are they wired? Are entrepreneurs born or made? And where do they get so much energy? I created this podcast to explore these questions and hopefully inspire others who are considering taking the entrepreneurial leap. Hi, welcome to There Is No Alternative. I'm Tina Bou-Saba, and today we are joined by Matt Mullenax, co-founder and CEO of Huron, a thriving men's personal care brand. I've known Matt for many years and have always been impressed by his tenacity and drive. Today, we're going to learn about where that comes from and how it led him to create Huron. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Tina. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you.
Likewise.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. Excited.
Awesome. Okay, so you were a college football player who wound up launching a skincare brand. Did you ever imagine that you would be working in the beauty and wellness space, and how did that transition happen?
Yeah, great question. I can't say that during my college football days, I was thinking about shampoo and body wash in the back of my mind. But I think for me, the founding story of Huron is as much around professional experience as it is personal experience. So professionally, when I graduated from college, I did the finance thing for a little bit. I worked in investment banking and private equity, spent some time as an early stage employee at Bonobos, but really all around the consumer sphere. And for me, kind of like the evolving landscape of D2C was always something that was very, very interesting to me, creating these really interesting relationships with customers and consumers. On the personal side of things, though, I was just a kid that grew up with bad skin. So as an athlete growing up, I was running from AAU basketball game to track meet to football practice and whatnot. And my skin took a beating. So I tried everything under the sun, anything you'd buy at a Kroger. I took Accutane twice, which was not enjoyable. And it actually got to the point where when I was working in my private equity job, my boss told me, he goes, "Hey man, like we can't take you to any more management meetings until you figure this out," which was not exactly a vote of confidence, as if I wasn't aware of the situation. But in a weird way, I was kind of like, okay, like fair enough. So that kind of led me into thinking about like, well, you know, I use Axe, Old Spice, Clearasil. Like, why do I use those products? And like, is there something else out there that not only speaks to me as a customer and a consumer, but that might resonate better with my skin? So that was something that really kind of kicked off this exploration of not only products, but also the category itself.
That's amazing. Such a cool story. So I feel like for entrepreneurs, there's a point when you think, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to take the leap. What was that for you?
It's really funny. I know exactly what I was doing, where I was sitting. I was in Hayes Valley in San Francisco with my girlfriend at the time, wife now, and we were grabbing some beers with friends. And I had been kind of like working on this behind the scenes. You know, I actually built and launched a fake brand. I was running meta ads all across the country, predominantly focused actually in the Midwest. And was kind of like doing this nights and weekends. And I remember her friend asking me, you know, okay, we just graduated from Stanford Business School. Like, what's on the docket? Like, what are you looking to do? And I was like, I looked her straight in the eyes. I was like, I'm actually going to launch like a men's personal care brand. And my, again, wife now, the girlfriend at the time looked at me. She's like, oh, we're telling people that now? So it was, I guess fall of 2017. But again, I'd spent, you know, a number of months beforehand kind of tinkering around with the idea, but that was kind of the point where I was like, yeah, I think so. So from then on, that was kind of day zero.
Love that. I also feel like once you say something and other people hear you say it, it's like, all right, that I got to do it. Now I have to do it.
There's like a hidden accountability piece.
Great. It's great.
That exists.
I love it. So can you tell us about the early days and, you know, kind of how you go from the idea to actually producing a physical product and creating a brand? and also how you approach the early team, specifically co-founder decision and journey.
Yeah, sure. So again, was kind of to your point, translating what was an idea on paper and some fake ads and meta to like, okay, what does a actual physical product, a widget, look like IRL, right? Through some of my network on the West Coast, I was actually introduced to my co-founder who spent decades, quite frankly, building products for the likes of Tom Ford, Lab Series, and a tons of high-end beauty brands under the Estee Lauder umbrella. And really the intro was positioned as, hey, Matt, I have this friend, Matt T, who spent, a number of years building products for some of these super luxury brands. Would you like to meet? And I'm like, well, I don't know anything about that. So absolutely. And we sat down in early 2018 when I moved to New York. And, it was kind of like one of those informal coffee chats, like, give me your background, let me tell you about it. And literally like 3 hours later, we were still sitting at that same LPQ and there was a snowstorm outside, literally like drawing on paper around like, okay, if we launch with like this assortment, like under this, for this persona, like how could we scale from there? So we really hit it off from kind of day zero. And I knew just kind of going through like the business school circuit, how important co-foundership can be. I mean, starting a company can be pretty lonely at times. And I think having someone to kind of not only share the ups, but also think about how to co-tackle the not so ups is important. And Matt and I really clicked because our skill sets were so complementary, right? Like I came from a traditional finance background where things like product margin and fully landed COGS and inventory turns, like that was my professional love language, whereas his love language was much more ingrained in product and understanding kind of consumer psychology as it pertains to product and the element of fragrance and all of these things that were truly more industry specific. That kind of allowed us to kind of mend together and kind of work in parallel work scopes while we still understood the vision of the early stages of Huron, which was to provide A+ quality products to the guy who was going to a Walgreens, Kroger, quite frankly, me 15 years ago, and striking out with products on shelf. That was kind of like the early stages in and around team building. From a branding standpoint, when we grew up pre-launch, that was still very much the era of go work with a quite expensive branding agency.
Yeah.
Which was the recommendation in one of our early investors and one of my mentors at the time. So we ended up working with Gin Lane, who's an agency here in New York, and got an amazing brand out of it. But I do think there are instances where if we had to do this over again, we might tactically do things a little bit differently. But we've been able to grow and scale over the course of 6 years. And I think some of the infrastructural groundwork that they laid in some of the early days were really critical in getting us off the ground.
Yep, that makes sense. Yeah, I vividly remember that time when there was a small set of these top tier branding agencies and any new brand was, really expected to launch with them. And the world has changed so much, but that's, how these things evolve.
It was almost like a rite of passage,
Yeah.
right?
Yes,
It was like,
exactly.
if you work with one of these 3 agencies, like it's easier to attract outside capital. It's
Exactly.
easier to attract team members, right? Like that was kind of like a badge of honor. It's like, oh, you worked with Gin Lane or you worked with this
Right.
agency. Like clearly there is something there. And yes, the times have changed.
Totally, totally. But it absolutely makes sense. On that point, do you think, as you think about the brand today and the community and what it stands for, how has your thinking on that evolved since when you first started it and it was, yeah, go to this top tier branding agency, and then how you think about how the brand shows up in the world today?
Yeah, great question. We think a lot about that. And I actually have been spending a decent amount of time over the past few weeks figuring out what does the 6 chapters later version of Huron look and sound like and feel like, right? And I think one of the things that we've seen with a lot of brands is the element of brand tension or brand polarization. And what I mean by that is over the course of kind of 2019 to 2023, early 24, let's call it, it was a very great idea from a brand perspective to be safe, right? It's like cast a wide net, don't upset, what have you. And I think the brands that truly hit escape velocity found a niche audience, whether or not that was accepted by all, maybe that was quite polarizing, and went pedal to the metal. So two brands that come to mind that kind of fall within that window, one is Liquid Death and one is Black Rifle Coffee. Like both of those businesses were huge. And that's because they knew who their audience was and catered to that specific group of people. So I think one of the underlying thoughts around what does that mean for Huron is, hey, if you're everything to everyone, then that means you're nothing to nobody, right? So thinking about like, what are the unique opportunities for us to sprint at? Now, we're not going to go like crazy off the deep end, but I do think there are angles where it becomes easier to identify Huron with a lifestyle, a way of thinking, tonality, a tone of voice that otherwise is, well, if I just Google Huron men's care and cover up Huron on the Google search results, could what comes after the semicolon apply to anyone else in our category? And if that's the case, then we're kind of a bland, right? We're not a brand.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking a lot about like, what does that strategic polarization exercise look like? How can we stand out a little bit from the crowd? And what can we do to leverage the learnings that we've accumulated over the course of the last 6.5 years to really cater to a consumer who is not only our target consumer, but the customer that keeps coming back to buy from Huron. Yeah. So a lot in and around the brand sphere, we've been poking at over the course of the last few months.
That makes sense. And what are you thinking? Like, who is that guy today? Who is the Huron guy?
It's a great question. I think for us, there's a number of different personas or archetypes, but I think there's a few kind of like underlying core threads. One is this appreciation for quality product, but the demand for value. So what I mean by that is Yeti is a great example, right? Like if you asked a lot of customers who might own a Yeti cooler, are you a premium consumer or customer? The answer for the most part would be no. Well, it's like, well, you could have bought an Igloo cooler for $30 off Amazon, but you bought a $600 cooler to take hunting on the weekends. Like, turns out you're a premium customer. But there's an element of this has a lifetime guarantee. This is going to keep everything cold for 3+ days, and it's super reliable. So I see the value in paying up for something because I can articulate what that value is. And I think for us, like, there's a similar notion amongst our customer base around like, hey, we might be 2x the cost of Old Spice, but here's why. It's, you don't want to smell like a gym locker room. Those products are full of chemically ridden, formulas that are neon blue or neon green, and just a laundry list of reasons why a Huron product is simply fundamentally better than what he is probably using today. So being able to articulate that in a way that's digestible becomes very, very important, right? Like I think our guy's the type of guy who comes across the Lulu boxer brief and is like, I love these and I'm going to buy 12 pairs of them so I don't have to think about this for another 18 months. Like that level of like, okay, I found this in that category, I'm going long. Like I can very much see that being our consumer. It's like, hey, I found this body wash and deodorant that I really, really like. I'm just going to buy 12 bottles now and then I don't have to think about this for the next 12 months. So, there's a lot of like aspirational elements, but yet approachable in terms of pricing. I think there's a notion around demanding better from everyday commodities that our guy likes. And I think at the core of the consumer, it's someone who just wants to be just a tad bit better, right? It's the guy who's waking up, when he doesn't want to go do the morning workout, or he's coming home early to help put the kids to bed, but then he's going in the gym to like finish an extra things like that, where there's a motivational component that is a huge driving factor day in and day out for this guy. Is something that resonates well, not only with me personally, but I think our brand.
That makes sense. Really, really interesting. I have to poke on one of those things on the workouts, because that reminds me, is it true that you work out at 3:00 in the morning?
No. No, that's, yeah, no. Now I get up early. I tend to get up around, before 4, but usually my schedule is I'll get up, let's call it 4. I'll work for about an hour and then I'll go run or do something. And then I'll be ready for when the kids wake up around 6. So for me, I think this dates back to just kind of being an athlete over the course of most of my life, albeit not a great one. It's just like it's almost the mental component today where it's like physically, like I've been 5'10", 175 pounds for 2/3 of my life. So I'm not like looking to make crazy physical gains. It's the mental component of like, okay, I've done something today. Like I've pushed myself today. I've ran, I've lifted, I've done something. And that just allows for so much more mental clarity for me. So morning times are just the time that I know that I have 60 to 90 minutes that are largely protected, that I can get something in before God knows what happens over the course of the day.
It's very impressive. Amazing discipline. And I'm fascinated by that athlete mindset. And I read a lot about it because I do feel like it's, to me, there's like this clear line between that mindset and then this entrepreneurial drive. But I have to ask you one question
Yeah.
about this. I'm so curious. What time do you go to bed to wake up at 4?
Call it like 9:15, 9:30.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
You're
not.
disciplined. It's like on the clock.
Yeah, don't ask me anything important past 9 because you're not going to get a really well thought out answer. That's for
Yep.
sure.
Yep. So what does a typical day look like? So you've been up for many hours and then you're going, do you go to an office? How does it look?
So I get up pretty early, like we talked about. I get a workout in for about an hour. We wake the kids up. My wife and I drop the kids off at daycare around 7:30. We both train into the city. So we live in the suburbs currently, outside of the city. Train into the city. Get in around 9. I leave the office around 5:15 or 5:30. It takes about an hour to get back. We do kind of like dinner, bath time as a family, and then I'll log on and do anything that's like a P1 or something that requires my input kind of before bed. And then, my wife and I will watch something terrible on TV, and then retire pretty early for the evening. But that's kind of the day in and day out.
And then in terms of your work day, I think I think a lot of people are curious about if you're the CEO and co-founder of a personal care brand. What are the types of things that you're doing in a particular day? I'm sure it's a big range.
Yeah. I hate to throw out the platitude of like every day is truly different,
Mhm.
but in some instances, like it really is. There are things that are certainly more urgent than others. There are immediate term goals that we're trying to tackle. There are 5-year goals that we're trying to tackle, right? So it's really the balance of all of those things, but it could range anywhere from, you know, f- since I could probably check the date, but I think September 1st of 2019, I have the same marketing dashboard that I've updated every single morning, which requires me to go into Meta, Amazon, Shopify, Google, and basically pull spend, new customer, etc. So I get a really quick understanding of like what was yesterday like, where are we pacing for the month. So there are no surprises. That for me is like very pivotal, almost to kind of like the morning workout where it's like, this is something I do every day to really have a finger on the pulse of where the business sits in this moment and what we need to action on to get to where we need to be. So that's kind of like what I knock out first. It could range anything from setting up new creative in Meta, working with an Amazon agency, working with our 3PL facility if anything needs to be done there, calls with our product development partners, our contract manufacturers in terms of new product runs or product replenishments, working with our CX team. I mean, there's truly is a whole host of things that we're seemingly touching on a day-to-day basis, but it's always kind of like a balance of, how do we strategically prioritize these chess pieces? And then another thing that, as we've continued to grow and scale, obviously our team's still super small today at only 4 people, but there have been multiple iterations of kind of the 4 to 6 at Huron. And I think one of the things that I've realized over the course of this journey is how difficult the team building component can be,
Mm.
quite frankly. Um, and a big learning for me, which I think and we might get into a little bit later, is getting out of your own way and trying not to do everything. Like I've always prided myself on being able to tackle so much and take on the world, but realized over time that that is more likely to be detrimental to the business than helpful. So figuring out how you can identify, source, recruit, and hire the best possible talent that you can get, giving them the tools and resources they need, and then getting out of the way. And I think that's like a really big learning for me over a more recent timeline, call it like 6 to 12 months. But that's where we've started to see a lot of scale in the business is when you're able to recruit truly those A++ players, giving them what they need to do to go sprint, and then kind of being a resource for them or essentially working for them.
Was there, I would love to talk more about this. Was there a particular situation or just like an aha moment where you were able to like make that leap in terms of thinking about how to empower people? What got you there?
I don't know if it was any one kind of inflection point per se. I think it was probably a culmination of having some turnover over the course of the
Mhm.
last 6 years and saying like, you know, if I were to do things differently, like this would be it for this particular role. And I think one of the biggest things that I've learned professionally over the past year or so is we hired a chief growth officer in May, and I met Cody probably 2 years ago at this point, and we began working together under like a consultant
Mhm.
agreement. And I think that allowed us really to understand how one another works, right? It's, hey, this part of our business is like underperforming. How do you think about like addressing that? Or, hey, this seems to be something that's breaking through on the creative side. Like, how do we pour fuel on the fire? And I think what you get there is a more brass tacks approach to fast forward X number of months, if not years, like you get a little bit of try before you buy on both ends, which is equally
Yeah.
as important versus this very romanticized kind of recruiting process. Come out, meet, let's go have dinner, da, da. Like you do kind of reference checks. They're probably not as intense as they should be.
Mhm.
And that's just something that now this is, I've only done this with one particular hire, but it has really fast tracked a lot of things to say, hey, here's what I really like about this. Like, here's kind of things that like I'm not so sure about, but it gives you again that essence of a little bit of a preview of what a full-time working relationship might be. And at the stage that we're at, like that's hugely important and impactful versus like day one, like I really hope this works out.
Yeah.
So
You get to date.
that's right.
Yep. Yep.
That's right.
I was recently on this topic. I was recently reading something where around hiring, and they were sort of talking about a matrix where you have like aptitude and attitude. And I'm curious what you think about that when you think about hiring people. How much are you looking for a particular like skill set or experience versus that hunger drive, but maybe not having the particular relevant experience?
Good question. I mean, we hired a young woman at the beginning of the year, Juliana, who's just done an amazing job for us. She has not used many men's skincare products, and she's relatively new to D2C, but she worked at Bain previously. So the
Mm,
intellectual horsepower is certainly there. Like this, we operate in a widgets world, right? Like it's not terribly difficult to understand this landscape from my perspective, right? You make this, you sell it for that, you collect this, you spend that. Like it can be distilled down to pretty basic X's and O's where the horsepower piece comes in from an EQ and an IQ standpoint is like how do we problem solve? How do we think about things in a way they haven't been thought about? Like how do we pour fuel on the fire? How do we attack things that aren't going the way that we would like for them to go? And I think that's the component and the willingness, quite frankly, to go sprint at those things are things that you really can't teach. They're more innate. From an attitude aptitude perspective, like I firmly believe like a lot of the industry knowledge of sorts can be learned. I think the willingness to dive in, roll up sleeves, try things you haven't done before, take on new roles and responsibilities, that is kind of more what we're looking for. But it also is kind of level dependent, right? If we want to hire a C-suite someone or VP of something, they obviously have to have relevant experience in operating and executing in that field. But I think where we're kind of building from a junior staff perspective, it's just the willingness to dive in that's probably paramount.
yeah, that makes sense. And how do you motivate the team?
Good question. I mean, I think, well, one, everyone is motivated by different things. So it's understanding like what are those inherent motivations for people. Two, I think as a team of four, it's very important to be transparent across the board. Like, here's where we're excelling, here's where we're falling short, here's where we're at a monthly basis, here's where we're on a quarterly basis. And we share those things internally so people can understand how are their respective institutions bubbling up to Huron at large. And I think without that visibility, people are like, well, I guess that email performed well.
Yeah.
But you still done like, hey, like emails, as a percent of sales is down 10% to what it was last month. Like, why? Were we getting fewer clicks? Like, were the clicks not driving purchases? Like, what was happening here? I think that kind of 360 picture and honesty that comes alongside of it, and transparency allows people to kind of better dissect not only their effort, but also their output around like, hey, are we ready, fire, aim, or should we be redirecting some of our efforts elsewhere where the ROI potential might be a bit higher? So I think one is just better understanding individual motivations, but two, and I think is something a lot of earlier stage folks can do from a leadership perspective, is just to be as transparent as possible, right? Like, I have an asymmetric interest in, the success of Huron versus a growth manager, right? But she has also decided to come join a 4-person team. And I think showing a great experience by being very transparent and honest around like, here's where we're at, here's where we're crushing, here's where we're falling short, help us get from A to B, I think is also very, very important.
Definitely. As a leader, you are having to balance that transparency with the confidence and belief in the business on a day-to-day basis, on a month-to-month basis. And like, how do you manage that and showing up for your team, the way that you need to, with the fact that for anyone building today, it's really hard and very uncertain?
Yeah, great question. Two things come to mind. One, I feel like I have a better understanding of our end consumer than most because I am that person, or I was that person. And I think, people talk a lot about like strategic pivots and whatnot. Like, I would be the worst B2B dental software founder because I don't care. I don't care about that space. Like, this is a space that like truly impacted me from how I used to show up at school, like how I used to show up at work, how I felt about my peers, how I felt about going out. Like, a lot of the things where I was like, man, like, I can't do this. I look terrible. Like, I have a very real understanding of what we're solving and for whom we're trying to solve. So I think that is very helpful on days where, man, it feels like a lot of chips are stacked against you. Like, who cares? Get out of bed. Like, there's that guy still ripping through GQ articles trying to find like the product for him. So that's one. And secondly, I think the mark of a good leader is just this notion of irrational optimism. Like, I have no doubt that we are blazing a trail that is going to lead to something that's like very, very successful in a relatively short period of time. Like, and that's not salesmanship. That's not me putting on a used car salesman hat. Like, I'm a pretty practical person, but I look at the landscape and I see some of the recent success stories, and I can say like, yeah, we might be running in different paths, but there is a ton of room here and we are the brand to do it. So I think that is an important component as well, which can be at times difficult to balance because it feels like 98% of the day I spend saying no. It's like, no, I don't want that. I don't want that tech. We don't need this. Not the right time for that. Not interested at all. Please unsubscribe me from all your emails. Like, that is the majority tactically of my day. So at times it can be like, well, I just said no for 7.5 straight hours, but I'm the most optimistic person about what we're building. Those can kind of be at, juxtaposed a bit, but I do think that is an important component in terms of how you show up every.
That's so true. I love that. I always feel like one of the ways I describe it is entrepreneurship. It's always problems, right? Problem after problem after problem.
Totally.
And so you have to be able to see the problem. And I think this is this athlete mindset, right? It's like, it's challenge, right? It's good. It's building muscles, right? It's not like bad and failing, so I feel like there's a mindset there.
Yeah. And I mean, are you a football fan?
I love football.
Okay. So I played cornerback, which is probably like the worst position to play because all I did was give up touchdowns, right? Like left, right, and sideways. So, but we had this thing, it was within our like little DB room. It was called short memory, but never forget, right? Like, you have got to show up on the next play because if you're like hanging your head, like some dude is going to run right past you again. Like, so you got to be ready to rock on the next play.
Yes.
And I think that has served me well because, you can't let the minutia like pull down that optimistic approach on a daily basis. But at the same time, I could tell you why a particular fund passed in 2019, who was on that call and what expletive reason they gave. But that's just me kind of being petty. But I think that's an example of like being able to quickly say, okay, that didn't go the way it was planned. What did we learn from it? Move on. And I think like again, that sort of pivot is something that is very, very important for this particular.
That's so good. Short memory, but never forget.
My wife makes fun of
It
me all the time for saying that,
it's
but
so good, though. It's so good. I will say I think it took me much longer to figure that out. And I think it's so important. It's so important because if you dwell on any one problem, it's impossible, right?
and you just
Because
get
it's all in it.
suffocated. You get
Exactly.
suffocated. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. You just kind of have to take a step back at times. You say like, okay, there's a lot of things going on right now. What truly is like the bottleneck, or what
Mm,
is the elephant in the room that we need to go attack? And then from there, all these other pieces kind of seem de minimis in comparison to that. So
yep.
a lot of it is kind of priority shifting, perspective sharing, and truly kind of aligning with the team to say, okay, like that went tremendously well, but we could have done this differently. Or that went tremendously well. Like, what do we need to do to make it X that next month? Right. So, but to
Mhm.
your point, it's always the problems never subside, they just shapeshift. So,
Yeah. So true. So true. Okay. I want to make sure I get to ask you about two parts of the business that I think are really, really interesting. One is Amazon, because even a few years ago, brands were very wary of selling on Amazon in the beauty and personal care and wellness space. And today, it is a critical part of most brands' go to market strategy. Can you talk about Huron's journey there and what you've learned and how you think about it?
yeah, we were a very early Amazon partner. So we launched in July of 2019. We were on Amazon by February of 20. So
Okay.
oddly enough, like we kind of threaded the needle in terms of timing, because obviously with what happened with COVID, shipping times went through the roof and whatnot for a lot of D2C brands, as a lot of logistics became in question for so many different companies. Amazon became the most reliable retailer. So if you want something in 2 days, order it from Amazon. So I think for us, like, luck was certainly a leg of the stool on
Mm,
that part. But I think more broadly, we just wanted to take a stance that wherever our customers wanted to buy Huron, we would be there within reason, that we could support. And we thought that was a great channel fit. To your point, I mean, when I was at Bonobos from 2008 to 2010, like thinking about the perspective on Amazon back then, it was like, what? Like, why
right.
would you
Right.
ever even consider selling on Amazon? And now you see the most luxurious brands in the world who are like, we just opened up our Amazon shop. Like it's
Exactly.
wild. So look, I think for us, it's being available where the customer needs us to be, again, within our control. But then secondly is understanding the unit economics across Amazon and how much they differ versus D2C, and making sure you can make the arithmetic work such that whether a customer buys on Amazon or a customer buys at usehuron.com, it doesn't matter for us. And I think that's an important part of the equation, that a lot of brands are like, oh, we sell on our site at 14, we should sell on Amazon at 14. Like, you don't have to. And I think that was a huge learning for us over the course of the last year or 18 months.
That's really interesting. Okay, one other question on the interesting business area is fragrance. So fragrance of over the past few years, of course, has been a very hot category. You all have launched a couple of fragrance products. Can you talk about like that decision, what you've learned, how you think about that as part of the assortment going forward?
Yeah, great question. I believe we launched our first fragrance in January of 23, which, as we think about the explosion of fragrance as a category, was definitely on the earlier side. And the reason for that was twofold. One, we just kept getting so much feedback that our customers loved the scent of our body wash, bar soap, and deodorant.
Mhm.
So it was kind of a natural adjacency from a product standpoint to say, like, well, what if we just tried fragrance? And I will say, into my co-founder Matt's credit, the way we actually build products is quite different from most brands. We will actually start with the oil first and then distill down to the ancillaries, to the body washes, the bar soaps, the deos, but all very similar in family. So we always had kind of that, that premium oil available, because like we started with the fragrance and then distilled down into like, what essentially does a cologne infused body wash smells like? What does that smell like? Well, you have to build a cologne first. So that's kind of like where we started. And I mean, this is Matt's background, right? Like he built the first number of fragrances for Tom Ford and the like. So he truly is one of the noses in the category. And I think for us, exploring what fragrance would look like was a really interesting opportunity. Now, I would say that for our customer in particular, it wasn't a unanimous like home run, because for some guys, like they'd be like, hey, I haven't worn a fragrance since Fierce by Abercrombie in 7th grade. So there was a little bit of a learning curve. But what's interesting about kind of one of the points I made earlier about Huron is there's this irrational nature to our customer base, which is just like, if you make it, I will buy it. And we've seen that across the board from a lot of customers. I mean, here's a fun fact. We launched in July of 19. We have a number of customers who've made over 100 purchases.
That's amazing.
We've only been alive for like 70 something months.
That's amazing.
So to have 100 plus purchases is a lot of purchases. So there's a notion of like, we've established or a validity kind of floor around our products will be incredible. So whatever you guys put out, I will buy. But fragrance is interesting because it was always kind of back pocket for us, because that was the genesis of the body wash. It was the genesis of the deo or the bar soap. And then we just essentially put the juice or the oil in an EDP bottle. So it's been a great success for us, and it's allowed us to tap into new markets, to get in front of new customers and consumers. And I'm really bullish on kind of the future for fragrance, not only for the industry, but for us as well.
That's great. That's great. So like, as you think about your Huron's NPD, we can expect more fragrance in the future.
I think so.
That's great. That's great. Okay. Today, like all the amazing things that you've built, do you think you could ever go back and work in a corporate environment?
What the entrepreneurship journey has taught me was how bad of an investor I was, honestly. And now I remember thinking and going through the fundraising process around like, man, like we're talking to firm X, like I better be like super buttoned up, because I'm going to get a bunch of questions that are really, there's a lot of folks out there who I like very much admired that I've spoken with. I'm like, that's the question you got? And I've really kind of done a 180 around like folks who truly have operating experience. Like if you've been on WeChat with your overseas supplier during the middle of COVID, that is a different level of operating level than someone who reads a sim or a pitch deck and decides whether or not that's worthy of building a model. Like, so I just think about like how I used to approach management meetings, the questions that I used to ask. Like I have such a different perspective on how I would not only evaluate businesses, but evaluate founders and founding teams, that I would actually like a mulligan to potentially go back into that realm at one day, because I think I'd be much more astute to what's going on and how I could be of help, versus being like, we're helpful to our management teams, which is what every fund says. But it's
totally.
It's like, great, can you offer three different 3PLs who have at least 2 nodes who operate? And people would be like, what are you talking about?
Right.
So
right. That's really interesting. So without naming names, what would be your general advice for investors in consumer brands?
Good question. One is the practice of empathy. I mean, building businesses today is very difficult. And I get that as an investor, you're probably looking at hundreds, thousands of businesses a year, but being nice is free. So there were a lot of instances where people would be like, oh, like one sentence pass email. I'm like, okay, like, so I think that's first and foremost. 2 is acknowledging or presenting how you can be helpful, right? Like, maybe what you offer, what is best is your network of early stage investors. Like, that's a great asset. Like, offer that. It doesn't have to be as brass tacks as like, hey, we know this 3PL or we know this Amazon agency. Like, it's kind of unrealistic, but there are various needs of the business where early stage investors can help and support. Even little things like, and I know you're so good at this, but just like championing founders along the way. Like if you get an investor note being like, hey, this was awesome. Like, keep pushing, great work. Like even those things, from my chair being like, oh, like Tina sees and hears me and like where I'm at, like that's like very refreshing. So there's a number of little things that can be done kind of like pre-investment, but also post-investment, just to keep that spirit of collaboration alive for sure.
Yep. That's super helpful. But I think one of the things that you and your team do a great job is consistency of updates because a lot of companies, relatively early stage or even a little bit further along don't share regular updates. And I think that for investors, it's so valuable to really be able to respond and understand, what are the challenges? What are the wins? And so that I think is you guys do a great job of that.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think some of it is to do just that, which is inform our collective investor base of where we're at. But you can't help Huron or you can't help your other brands if you don't know where we need help.
Exactly.
So that's certainly half the battle. And the onus is on the founder, CEO, whomever to keep a regular cadence of updates. But secondly, it's also just a really good practice for me to go through to be like, I live and breathe in the minutia.
Yeah.
So to rappel back out every 90 days to be like, timeout, like we made 85 basis points improvement in product market. Like that's really good, right? So like being able to actually synthesize 90 days of work and understand, be like, again, are we achieving near-term goals? Are we on pace for where we want to be at the end of 12 months? Where are we looking from like our 3 and 5 year plan? Like those are all things that can garner a ton of time that probably aren't given the time otherwise. So it's just a really good practice to go through.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Okay, this is so great. I have one more question for you. So I talk to so many young people like early career who would look at what you're doing at Huron and say, that is my dream. That, I would do anything to be the co-founder and CEO of a personal care brand. What advice would you give to them?
Wow.
Easy question.
So this for sure. I mean, we all live and lead wildly busy lives, but I am very empathetic to the fact that if I get a cold email, not LinkedIn, email, around like, hey, Matt, I'm thinking about starting a D2C vitamin company. Here's where we're at. I will send you a virtual Starbucks gift card for 15 minutes of your time. I'm going to be like, I'm in.
Yep.
Like, I don't have 15 minutes, but I also realize, and I hope that a lot of founders do, is we are in the chairs that we are in because so many people have given us those 15 minutes. Right. And I think there's a subtle notion around like paying it forward and like helping out whenever you can and however you can. But I would be much more inclined to do that, to say, okay, this person from this cold email has done 5 minutes of research on Huron. They've gone to the site. They've looked up my backstory. They've read something to be like, oh, there's a mutual connection note here. Let me harp on. And then it's like, okay, you've done like the requisite due diligence. Let's do it. When I get like, hey, double space _ Matt space comma, like I saw you worked at different font size, purple. Yeah. Like I'm like, delete. So it's like, I'm glad your AI infused whatever is really good at writing emails. Well, this one was terrible. So if you are actually interested in what the person has to say, and if you're actually interested in hoping to connect with them, like write a thoughtful email. It doesn't have to be 7 pages long, but do some research, reach out, and I bet you the results you'll find you'll be pleased with.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's fantastic.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Tina. Appreciate it.
Awesome. If you love this episode, find more at cxtinvestments.com and follow me on LinkedIn, Tina Bou-Saba.